Hello again. In this video I want to talk about an aspect of guitar setup, namely the action. When we talk about the action, what we mean is the gap between the top of the fret and the bottom of the strings, basically how high the strings are above the fingerboard. Now getting this set right has a big impact on the way that the guitar feels to play and the quality of sound that you get out of the guitar. As with a lot of things in guitar setup, it's not an absolute. There's a great deal of sort of like personal preference, and it's influenced by the sort of style of music that you play and how you play the guitar. Might influence how high or how low you want the action. So I'm not necessarily going to give you any specific measurements or recommendations here, because at the end of the day it's personal preference. I find if you give people sort of like absolute measurements, they'll strive to get that, believing that it's right. And it might not actually be right for them, it might not actually be right for you, for your style or something. You might need something a little bit higher or a little bit lower. So we'll just talk about the general ideas and how you get your guitar set up. I've seen various different ways of measuring the action on a guitar. Some people will tell you just take the guitar as it is. Now this is assuming that you've got the truss rod set up properly in the neck. Truss rod adjustment, that way subject of a whole separate video. But assuming that the neck's properly straight, there's various different ways I've seen of people telling you to measure the action. They could either say, measure the gap between the top of the fret and the bottom of the string at the 12th fret, or they'll say like fretted at the 1st fret, fretted at the 17th fret, and then measure the gap under the strings at the 7th fret. There's all sorts of different ways. But basically it's about making sure that the height of the strings above the fingerboard is comfortable and sounds right for you. There's a few factors that affect this. First of all is the gauge of string that you play, so how thick your guitar strings are. The thicker they are, basically the more weight that they carry and the more space they need to vibrate. Now you might think when you pick a string it moves up and down this way across the fingerboard. Well, it does, but it's actually more of a circular motion, so as well as moving that way across the face of the guitar, it also moves up and down in this kind of circular motion above the fingerboard. So obviously if the strings are set too low, the bottom of the string is too close to the fret, what you'll get is a nasty buzzing sound, because the string's moving so much that when it's like on its downward cycle, the bottom of the string's actually catching against the fret, so the note won't ring out cleanly and you'll get a nasty buzzing noise. So the string needs to be high enough that you don't get that happening. But at the same time, depending on your style, you might not want to be pushing the string down too much, because the more effort you have to put in pushing the string down, taking from where it is at rest down against the fingerboard, the further you have to travel, the more work you do. So if you're into playing very, very fast styles, then you're probably going to want a lower action. This is why a lot of the very fast, like shredding heavy metal players tend not to use such heavy gauge strings, because by using a lighter gauge string you can get away with a lower action, and lower action means you can play the faster runs a little bit easier, because your fingers don't need to do quite so much work to get the string pressed down against the fret. Kind of related to that, generally speaking, if you took an absolute measurement of the action of one of the bass strings versus the action of one of the treble strings when your guitar set up, generally you'll find the action is going to be a wee bit higher on the bass side, because like I say, those strings are a little bit thicker and they need to move a little bit more. So the first step to making sure that your action is set right is making sure that the height of the nut is correct. Now I talked about the nut in a video that I did not all that long ago, so I'll not dwell on that here, but basically the point is that where the strings come over the nut need to be at the right height. Not so low that the action is going to be so low that the strings are buzzing against the fret, but again not so high that you can't adjust the action at the other end of the neck and get something comfortable. If it's a metal nut like a Floyd Rose, it needs to be adjusted one way. If it's a plastic or a bone nut, then a luthier, somebody experienced who's got the right tools, probably needs to cut the nut slots for you. But step one is making sure that the nut is at the right height. So as part of your setup you should have the neck nice and straight, and then there's various ways down at the bridge end of things that you can adjust the string height, and this depends on the type of guitar that you have and the kind of hardware that it's got. I'll show you a couple of examples. So here on this guitar, on my Thompson custom guitar, I've got a Floyd Rose tremolo. I'm going to zoom the camera in so you can see this in a bit better detail. I guess I zoomed in a little bit now, you can see this a bit better. I'll just move the tremolo out of the way. This particular type of bridge, like the Floyd Rose style tremolo bridge, we've got two mounts here with screws. These are mounting bolts that go into the body of the guitar, and if I want to adjust the height of the bridge, turn these just with a screwdriver, or raise or lower a particular side of the bridge, and that will allow me to get the string height either set a bit higher or a bit lower, to get the height of the strings above the fingerboard the way that I want them. Okay, so that's the Floyd Rose bridge style of adjustment, where you've got the two adjustment points, so you can move the bass side up and down, or the treble side up and down, or the whole thing up and down. That I find perfectly usable, and you might come across that not just on tremolo type bridges, but on other stop tail pieces like the Les Paul style there, where you've got the stop tail piece, but you've got the tunematic bridge, style bridge, which goes up or down just on the bolt either side, one on the bass, one on the treble. Personally, I find that's fine for just in the action on the guitar, but there's another style of bridge that you might come across that is here on the Telecaster, and I'll show you that one a bit closer. Okay, so this guitar's got a more traditional Fender Style bridge on it. What we've got here is 6 individual saddles, and on each saddle, either side of the string, there's a tiny little screw, tiny little grub screw. We can adjust these individually with a little Allen key, and that allows individual saddles to be moved up or down, so it gives us a slightly finer adjustment. So rather than moving the bridge as a whole, we can do individual strings. This is the sort of thing you'll find on Stratocasters and Telecasters. Another style you'll find on the Telecaster is actually done on pairs of strings, so you'll have the first and second on one combined saddle, third and fourth on a combined saddle, and fifth and sixth on a combined saddle. But it's a similar sort of thing. There's a little grub screw either side, and you can move the whole saddle up or down, and that allows you to set the height, set the action of an individual of the strings. So there's a couple of examples of the sort of bridge that you might come across on an electric guitar, all designed to do the same thing in terms of adjustment. That's to allow you to set the height of the strings above the fingerboard, so just the action to get something that's right for you. And as I said before, I'm not going to make any recommendations for like specific settings or specific heights that I think you should use, because a lot of it comes down to personal preference and playing style. If you're somebody who picks the strings really hard, the strings are going to move more, so they're going to need a bit more clearance above the frets, so that they don't buzz. So you're probably going to want a slightly higher action than somebody who's got quite a gentle touch, doesn't hit the strings that hard, could get away with a lower action. Personally, I don't have the lowest action in the world. I like a little bit of space there, so I can kind of dig in. I use quite a lot of left-hand vibrato, and I find having the higher action is just a bit more comfortable for doing that. One thing that's interesting to note about the action on a guitar is the effect it has and the impact it has on you when you're learning. Now, over the years, I've taught loads of people with all sorts of quality of guitar and quality of guitar setup. And quite a lot of the people I've taught have had, maybe it's not so good guitars as the first guitar. It's not been set up so well, the string action's been, relatively high. And as a beginner, that's really hard work, because you've got to push down harder to get the strings against the frets. It's more work, and you're doing something that's already unfamiliar to you if you're not used to playing the guitar. It's a fairly unfamiliar sort of action, what you have to do with your fretting hand. But if you persevere with that, then whatever guitar you move on to, it's going to be easier to play, because the action's going to be lower than the really ropey action that you started off with. And that's quite a nice way to progress, with your guitar journey. Contrast that with some people I've taught who, for whatever reason, have had more expensive, much better set up, much easier to play guitars as their first guitar. I remember one guy I taught a few years ago, and like his very first guitar that he'd ever owned, it was a Gibson Les Paul Standard, and that was beautifully set up. It had a very, very low action. He found it, it's incredibly easy to play. So as a beginner, all he really had to do was get his hands around the shapes, being able to play chords, being able to play scales and licks and so on. He didn't have so much of a barrier to the physical, just being able to push the strings down against the fret. which in a way was nice for him because it encouraged him to be able to play. Now, I remember one time I handed him one of my guitars to play, and I've got it slightly higher than, well, it's certainly not a high action, but it's certainly not low by any means, because I like, as I say, I like to dig in a little bit with left hand vibrato. And he actually found my guitar really, really difficult to play, because as a guitar player he'd never known anything other than a guitar with a really, really low action. So personally, I'm not a big fan of somebody starting off on the easiest guitar in the world to play. I wouldn't, go out of my way to make somebody's life difficult, but I think it's good if you start on something that hasn't got the best setup in the world, and you do have to work that a little bit harder, because it helps to build up the strength in your fingers, and it helps you to get your technique. And then from there on, everything's a bit easier, because as you play on better guitars, you don't have to work so hard, and you can kind of progress that way. So as I say, string height and string action, it's quite a personal aspect of setup. It's governed by the sort of style that you play and the way that you like the guitar to feel. So I won't make any specific recommendations. What I would recommend you do, if you feel confident enough with a screwdriver or a set of Allen keys, whatever you need to adjust the bridge in your guitar, is to try adjusting the action. See if you can take it a bit higher, a bit lower than what you've got. See how that feels to you, how it sounds. Make sure you don't get any nasty like buzzing noises, because the string's too low against the fret. But you might find that you can set the guitar up something that works better for you than the way you've got it set up at the moment. Like I say, personal preference, see how you get on. If you don't feel confident, if you go and talk to the luthier at your local guitar store, show him your guitar. If he's a good luthier, he'll take a bit of time to sit down with you and look at the way your guitar's set up, maybe watch you playing, and be able to make some recommendations about, maybe that action could be a bit higher or a bit lower, it might suit you. So that's just a quick run through about the impact that string action has on the way you play and how you set it up. Hope you found that useful, and I'll see you in another video next time. Bye for now.